Welcome once again to Strange Planet. Thanks for sticking me in your ear. Regular listeners to this program are well aware that I love coincidences, serendipity, synchronicity. It's right up there with time travel among my favorite topics. And on this episode of Strange Planet, my guest is going to help us dissect the anatomy of a coincidence. Bernie Beitman, MD, is the first psychiatrist since Carl Jung to systemize the study of coincidences. He developed the first valid scale to measure coincidence sensitivity, and he's written several coincidence articles for psychiatric annals. He's the author or editor of 16 professional books. He's a visiting professor at the University of Virginia, attended Yale Medical School, completed a psychiatric residency at Stanford, and he's the author of Connecting with Coincidence and his latest, Meaningful Coincidence: How and Why Synchronicity and Serendipity Happen. There it is, right there. Bernie Beitman, welcome. How are you?
Thanks, Richard. Glad to be here with you. Sounds like we're gonna have a good time today, from what I can hear.
I've been looking forward to this. If I might, could I start with a coincidence?
Please do. I love starting with the host coincidence story.
Okay, well, it didn't happen to me, but I'm gonna share. It's, I think, a remarkable coincidence that was recently shared with me. In fact, last night I was recording a podcast, and my guest was Craig Campobasso. And Craig is a Hollywood casting director and a filmmaker, and he's written about and studied the UFO phenomenon for decades. And he's obsessed with UFOs, and he's a terrific writer. So he inhabits these two worlds, Hollywood and ufology. And he told me, I always wondered why, where did I get this from? Why am I so obsessed with UFOs? And when he was 12, he learned that the man that he assumed was his father was really his stepfather, and his biological father was someone his mother had a brief affair with. She found out he was married shortly after discovering she was pregnant with Craig. So they broke off the affair. They never spoke again, never met again. And she obviously, she decided to keep her child. Craig was born. He had no contact with his biological father, and he knew next to nothing about him. Then in 2019, he finally learned the identity of his father, and he learned he had passed away in 2006. And then through a series of coincidences, he was able to meet his biological father's brother, and they had dinner. And he learned that his late father had served in the Air Force in the 1940s. But here's where it gets interesting. After he left the Air Force, he went to work on Project Blue Book, which of course was the systematic study of the UFO phenomenon conducted by the U.S. Air Force in the 50s and 60s. So after Blue Book, Craig's father began working in set construction on the Warner Brothers lot in Hollywood. So his father, whom he had never met and knew nothing about, inhabited the same two worlds, ufology and Hollywood. What do you think of that?
It's a good one. I haven't heard. I mean, I like hearing ones I haven't heard before, because I make categories of things. And it reminds me of Rupert Sheldrake and Morphic Resonance, because once a pattern gets started, it's easier to repeat it. It's like nature remembers, and there's something about that suggests that nothing got in the way of the guy you're telling me about, of connecting up with what his father had been doing. There was no family stuff going on that got in the way. So he could probably feel a yearning for his father, at least a wanting to know something about his father. Did he want to know when he's age 12 and found out? Did he want to know something about him?
I don't think he thought much about it. I'm just trying to recall the conversation, but he didn't know much about him. I think he said it was much later in life when he actually decided to go looking for him.
Well, that's something different than what I'm asking about. I in my book, which has also got a cover back there, Meaningful Coincidences, I write about the psychosphere. And the psychosphere is our mental atmosphere. And there's a lot going on in our mental atmosphere that we really study very much, but it's a lot of psi stuff, telepathy, clairvoyance, and a lot of other weird things. Like maybe there's a true self up there connected to our on the ground self, I think. And you can do telepathic connections by having your true self connect to a true self or a higher self
Hmm.
with another person that you're on this ground connected to. So you can think something go up here, go over to the other person's higher self, and that comes down to the other person, and they come together. That's a simple version of telepathy. A friend of mine was just saying, I miss my boyfriend. I miss him so much. We haven't been together for such a long time. So I'm sending smoke signals, she says. So this is the way I explained it to her, that at least my model of it. And so it's a nice square. It's a very fluid thing.
Right.
Depends on emotions and timing and all kinds of stuff. The psychosphere is like water, moves around a lot.
Maybe a little
So
bit of non-locality going on there too, and we'll get into that in a minute, if we could. But I mean, and in the foreword to the book, which is written by Terry Marks Tarlow, PhD, he sort of sets out wonderfully what you set out to do in the book, and he talks about how you examine coincidences through through different lenses. One is Carl Jung's synchronicity, meaningful coincidence. Another is Horace Walpole's serendipity or happy accidents, and then we have Paul Kammerer's seriality, recurrence of numbers or events. Could you explain briefly what each of those means?
yeah,
What Jung mean by synchronicity, Walpole by serendipity, and so forth?
the the reason the book is called Meaningful Coincidences is because those three and a fourth, which is simulpathity, which I invented, which I can also describe, fall underneath the idea of coincidences. And coincidences are the coming together of two events that have no likely explanation, but likely means that there still could be. So they make you wonder. And the three general forms that people have come up with, and the fourth that I suggested, Jung was synchronicity, but Walpole was a century earlier. Jung's synchronicity idea, for sake of definitions, Jung didn't mean meaningful coincidences by synchronicity. He meant an acausal connecting principle, because he was trying to explain meaningful coincidences with the word synchronicity. And he thought that meaning connected them rather than cause. That's the original definition of synchronicity. But as you know, everybody uses synchronicity for meaningful coincidences. And Jungians, when they think about synchronicity, what is it? The real strict definition for Jungians doing psychotherapy particularly is that the meaningful coincidence has to help you develop, to individuate, to develop psychologically, interpersonally, and spiritually. So it's a more psycho-spiritual thing, synchronicity. And Jung was pretty mystical and also a psychotherapist. So that's his tradition, although the word gets used in other ways, and what I would call serendipity, and others might. So there's an overlap, like a Venn diagram with the two of them overlapping. And I got I got a little bit kind of bothered by the fights that sometimes people get into, whether it's serendipity or synchronicity. I wanted to get down to some basics, but I hope you may notice that serendipity, synchronicity, seriality, and my word simulpathity all begin with an S and end with ITY.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I like that because it's kind of funny, but I didn't invent the first three. I just did the fourth one, and I kind of tried to match it, but that's just that's a serial coincidence. That's where a seriality is when you and anybody else can see the series. It's objective. All the elements of it are objective. You can see them, I can see them. So we can see the ITY, both of us, anybody. So seriality is that. It's repetition, objectively identifiable. Synchronicity is often something you have in your mind. And I would suggest the guy you talked about earlier had somewhere in his mind, who's my father?
Mm.
And how come I'm doing these two different worlds? And so he got a partial answer to it when he found out his father's history. That's mind, what I'm thinking, feeling, wondering about imagining, matching something in the environment that anybody could see, his father's history. And that's the tendency to think mind object. Mind object synchronicity tends to be mind object. Serendipity tends to be mind object. But serendipity and Walpole's happy accidents. Walpole was in the House of Lords in England, and a high class kind of guy, and he loved the fact that if he needed something, he'd accidentally find it. I mean, he just did it a lot. He called it Walpoleania, and then he read the fable of the three princes of Serendip. Serendip's the old name for Ceylon, which is, and now you tell me,
Sri Lanka.
Sri Lanka. And but this was a fable that got changed over the years, but it had to do with three princes and their father sending them out to figure out what's going on in the world. And they would find out stuff by accident. It would kind of just happen to them. So it required sagacity to see the clue that they were looking for to know what was going on. And that's what serendipity is. People find things in one of two ways. Usually serendipity is like looking for something but finding it in an odd way, like where did I put the figs? I put the figs someplace. I was looking for them for my smoothie, and okay, I'll find them someday. Well, I did find them, but it was too late. They had gotten rotten by looking someplace else for something else. So I found where the figs were. That's one form of serendipity. Another one is not particularly looking for anything in particular, but finding something of value when you see it. So serendipity is more operational, more real world discovery. And if you look at Nobel Prize winners' stories about how they find their prizes, well, we did the organized research and we did the scientific method. Sometimes it's just the maid in the 1880s turns on the stove while the guy's got something on the stove by accidentally having it there, and she turned it on, didn't expect it, and then he makes something happen that heat does that allows us to be able to see the anatomy of a cell.
Right. I think I might have an example of, when you're talking about, now this isn't a happy accident, but when you go looking for something else, I don't know how much of this story is true.
That's a problem sometimes.
But it's the guy that shot Archduke Ferdinand that supposedly started World War I. I mean, it set off a series of kind of geopolitical domino effects that ultimately led. But this Gavrilo Princip, who was waiting for Archduke Ferdinand's motorcade to come by in Sarajevo in 1914, he got tired of waiting because I think the motorcade got lost along the way. And so Princip basically gives up after waiting and waiting and waiting. He starts wandering around Sarajevo. He kind of gets lost. He gets hungry. He walks into a delicatessen and he orders like a ham sandwich. Meanwhile, the motorcade, lost in the same place, stops basically outside of the delicatessen. Princip comes walking out with his ham sandwich, sees Archduke. He goes, there he is, shoots him, and voila, like the ham sandwich that caused World War I. It may be apocryphal parts of it. Maybe there's a kernel of truth there. It's a wonderful story. I mean, it's a tragic story. But is that kind of what you were talking about, where you go to find something? It's not what you were looking for necessarily, but you get this.
He was looking, but he found the Archduke in a way that he didn't expect to find it.
Right.
He was looking, and that brings up a chapter in my book that is about called Human GPS, which is getting to where you need to be without knowing how you got there. And this is a perfect example of that. He gets lost, wants to get his ham sandwich, and the timing is just perfect for him to find what he's looking for. That's what I call human GPS. Mm. My first experience of that, very similar, was I was 8 or 9, and I came home and I said, hey, Mom, where's Snapper? I said, my dog. And she said, I don't know. And she said, go to the police station. And I said, okay, I was a good boy. I mean, I still think it's very funny that she said, go to the police station. And I think she was just yeah, just putting it off.
Mhm.
But she also thought I was the prince. So maybe she thought I could do it. I don't know. I never had a chance to ask her, and I would have liked to, but I never thought of doing it. So I get on my bike, go back over to the elementary school and cross the big road where I knew across the road there was the police station. I never been across the big road. I knew how to go up to the intersection, go over and then go to the police station and climb up the stairs, park my bike, find the big door. It was a big door. I was 8 or 9. It's a police station. Push it open, big man behind a big desk. And I say, have you seen my dog?
Wonderful, wonderful.
So, I mean, I thought he might. So he says, sorry, son. No. I mean, you're the first person that laughed at that. And I'm glad you did, because it's so ridiculous sounding for a little kid to go to the cop and how do I know who your dog is? I mean,
Well,
that kind of
yeah,
thing.
not ridiculous, sweet, just innocent, beautiful.
Innocent.
Yeah.
Yes, very innocent. My mother told me to ask, and I went and I asked because I loved that dog. And I still cry now when I think about how I felt when he said, I don't, sorry, son, I don't know where he is. So I was crying a lot, going back down the stairs and got on my bike. And instead of going across the big street, I was crying so much, I just went right along the big street. And what? Is a dog walking like Snapper? Is that Snapper? It was Snapper. So I got lost, he got lost, and we found each other. And that's not unlike the story you told.
Yeah, I like yours better.
Well, yes, it's. I think you might be able to feel it. I just feel it when I say it, how much I love that dog, and he loved me. So
Yeah, yeah, that bond is incredible with animals.
yes,
Um, you had another profound coincidence, a tragic one. I think you were 31, involving your dad.
yeah, yeah, and that's where I came up with that fourth term, simulpathity. And simulpathity is same time pathy, feeling something, the pain of a loved one usually. So I was standing in my Victorian house in San Francisco. I mean, we're renting it and standing in the sink. It was 11 p.m. San Francisco time. It was like uh, couldn't get this thing out of my throat. I was standing there and I was choking and I was choking and I was choking and I was choking. And then finally it stopped. I hadn't eaten anything. I don't know what it was, but something stuck in there. The next day I found out that in Wilmington, Delaware at 2 a.m., which is 11 p.m. San Francisco time on February 26th, 27th in Wilmington, my father was choking on his own blood and dying.
Oh dear.
So I honor him by telling the story, really, is what I'm doing. And Snapper, too. I mean, I tell those stories because I love them and they love me. And this is like my way of saying, you're there. But the funny thing is about this, I've told that story before about my father. And I got this image of his father, Ludwig, saying, hey, I brought Carl into the world. How about also recognizing me? So Ludwig Beitman, we recognize you with this also, because he's in part of this. He's in part of this too.
Of course.
And so I said, "Whoa, that's weird," among other things. And he wasn't. He was recovering from an illness. Thought he was going to be all right. So I wondered, am I the only one? And one of the lessons of talking about coincidences is that if I experience something weird, somebody else will or is currently experiencing it. We're all part of a collective consciousness here that connects us, so that we are feeding off of it. The psychosphere, as I call it, energy information, is shared. This person over there come up with the same idea around the same time because they're looking and the idea is there to be found. So simulpathity is a signal of how other people do also that kind of experience. And I did some research, asked people the question, looked around in the literature and found some other good research suggesting, this is indeed an experience many people have.
A new Richard Syrett's Strange Planet drops every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Subscribe at strangeplanetpodcast.com.